At 15, I took a young lad under my wing, forced him to bow his head in submission to me. He followed me in humiliation for 2 years. Later, my entire family was convicted and exiled. It wasn't until he won battles in the northern frontier and the emperor declared a general amnesty that I returned to Chang'an, reduced to the lowliest of scribes and painters in the literary bureau. At that time, he became the most sought-after newly ennobled marquis in Chang'an City. We reunited at the gates of the Grand Princess's residence, where he gazed down at me from horseback as I knelt on the ground. Does the marquis recognize this painter? I do not. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now the story begins. The early summer sun blazed fiercely. I stood in the long queue outside the princess's residence, my robes soaked with sweat clinging uncomfortably to my back. The shrill cicada songs mingled with the painter's whispered conversations, creating a dizzying cacophony. They say Her Highness has gone to great lengths this time, selecting 108 painters to portray Lady Minghui. Exactly, each person gets 1 tael of silver as payment, and if the painting turns out well, they can earn another 10 taels. Ha, what's 10 taels? If it catches the princess's eye, the reward could be 100 taels of silver. I lowered my gaze, my fingertips unconsciously rubbing the edge of the painting box. 1 tael of silver was enough to cover my living expenses for a month. In the past, this amount of money couldn't even buy me an inkstone, but now, it's what keeps me alive. The sound of hoofbeats came from afar, rhythmic and urgent. The crowd suddenly stirred, someone whispering, "The Marquis of Dongping is coming." I stood at the end of the line, lifting my gaze to look ahead. At the forefront, a man clad in dark brocade robes sat tall atop his horse. His features were sharp as blades, jaw tightly clenched, exuding an icy aura that warned others to keep their distance. Xie Zheng. 5 years had passed since we last met, and the youthful innocence had long faded from him, replaced by the sharp edge honed on the battlefield. The people in the procession knelt one after another to pay their respects. I stood frozen until someone beside me tugged at my sleeve and whispered urgently, "Miss, kneel quickly." My knees struck the scorching bluestone pavement with a heavy thud, the pain bringing me back to my senses. "Is that the Marquis of Dongping?" someone murmured in hushed tones. I heard he just distinguished himself in battle and was personally ennobled by His Majesty. Now he's the most sought-after rising star in Chang'an. Princess Minghui has fancied him for ages. His visit today, could it be specially to offer early birthday congratulations to Her Highness? I bit my lip so hard the metallic taste of blood flooded my mouth. The clip-clop of hooves drew nearer, finally halting before the princess's residence gates. Xie Zheng swiftly dismounted from his horse. The steward fawned as he approached. "Marquis, your timing is perfect today. The princess was just speaking of you." Xie Zheng responded with a faint hum, though his gaze swept over the kneeling crowd. Unexpectedly, that icy stare came to rest upon me, the moment their eyes met. His pupils abruptly constricted before quickly regaining composure. "Does his lordship recognize this gentleman?" The steward followed his gaze, probing cautiously. Xie Zheng withdrew his glance, his voice chillingly cold. "Never seen him before." This lowly servant misspoke. The steward hastily apologized with an ingratiating smile, fine beads of sweat forming on his forehead, with the princess's birthday approaching. Her Highness the Grand Princess specially ordered notices posted to recruit 108 master painters for portrait commissions. These are all the artists from the Literary Academy who came today. Xie Zheng said no more and strode straight through the manor gates. I remained kneeling where I was, the scorching sun burning my back. Yet my heart felt soaked in icy water, trembling with cold. "I don't know you." Such effortless words. Times have indeed changed. That youth who once bowed before me has now become the lofty Marquis of Dongping, while I remain but a lowly painter. Only after the princess's steward escorted the Marquis of Dongping into the residence did the crowd begin rising reluctantly to their feet. "Miss, why is your hand bleeding?" A kind-hearted painter beside me noticed and asked with concern, "Our hands are our most precious tools as painters. Will you still be able to hold a brush later?" Only then did I realize my palm was bleeding from where my nails had dug in. The sight was startling. I shook my head and smiled faintly. "It's nothing." Xie Jing's figure disappeared through the gates of the princess's residence. So he was the Marquis of Dongping, whose legendary deeds had recently become the talk of Chang'an. In the 5th year of my exile to southern Yunnan, news of his victory pacifying the northern frontier reached the capital. His Majesty was so pleased that he issued a general amnesty. 3 months later, I returned to Chang'an. Xie Jing has already been chosen as the fortunate suitor. The princess's beloved daughter, Princess Minghui, a true noble beauty with peerless grace and elegance. They are indeed a perfect match. My heart is in turmoil, filled with bitterness and shame. I only wish to flee. "Hey, you there, it's your turn," the princess's steward suddenly shouted impatiently. Jolting me back to reality, I realized I'd been standing frozen on the stone steps for far too long. Looking up, I saw the steward rapping his sandalwood desk with a paperweight, his sharp eyes gleaming beneath grizzled brows. Yes, you, what are you dawdling for? Hurry up and get on." I gathered my thoughts and hastily bent forward to approach. The bald brush hanging at my waist knocked against the paint box strapped to my back, producing dull thudding sounds. "This humble servant Jiang Ning begs to paint the young mistress's portrait." My throat had somehow gone bone dry, the words squeezed out like air from a broken bellows. My fingers unconsciously tightened around the yellowed letter of recommendation in my sleeve written for me by Master Wang from the framing shop on West Street. The steward's gaze swept over me inch by inch, laden with scrutiny. I clearly saw his nostrils flare. He must have caught the acrid bitterness of cheap pine soot ink clinging to my clothes. "Is that all?" He flicked open the sample painting I presented with a paperweight, letting out a cold laugh as the paper rustled sharply. It was my copy of Court Lady's painting, where the trembling brushstrokes from last night's rushed work still lingered along the colored edges of the lady's robes, as the painting fluttered down. I reached to retrieve it. My sleeve abruptly slid back half an inch, exposing the tattoo on my wrist to the light. "A criminal's mark." The steward's voice suddenly rose sharply, plunging the surroundings into dead silence. Cold sweat gradually seeped from the nape of my neck, yet I dared not raise my hand to wipe it. Last time at the county office while painting the shadow wall, I'd been kicked by the housekeeper for that very motion. "Drag him away, drag him away," the steward barked harshly. In an instant, the guard's scabbards were already pressing against my throat. "What is all this commotion?" A cool, detached voice came from within the mansion. The crowd parted like waves as black brocade boots stepped across the blue bricks, stopping right before me. I remained frozen on my knees, my gaze only reaching the jade belt at the person's waist. "This painting," his fingers lifted my court lady's painting. The drapery lines subtly echo Wu Daoz's water shield stroke technique. "It's an excellent piece." My heart suddenly clenched. That voice, suddenly looking up. I met those familiar phoenix eyes. It was Xie Jing again. He glanced down at me, pinned disgracefully to the ground by guards, and noticed the indigo, crime, character tattoo peeking from beneath my slipped sleeve. "Marquis," the steward hastily bowed. "She's of criminal status. How could?" "Isn't the princess urgently awaiting paintings?" Xie Jing cut him off directly. "Your painting skills are good, but don't neglect what truly matters." His eyes held frost, his expression unreadable. Exactly the same look he'd given me years ago when I stood shielding him, smashing those bullying aristocratic brats from the Imperial Academy bloody-headed with an inkstone. I first met Xie Jing at the Imperial Academy. At that time, my father was still the revered Grand Tutor whom the Crown Prince looked up to. favored by His Majesty and at the height of imperial grace, I was the Grand Tutor's cherished pearl. And with the Crown Prince himself declaring me his little sister under his protection, who in Chang'an City didn't know that the eldest daughter of the Jiang family was not to be trifled with, even the erudite scholars of the Imperial Academy would greet me respectfully with a Miss Jiang. In the heart of spring, the crabapple blossoms in the Imperial Academy were in full, glorious bloom. Hey hey, look, it's that motherless child from the Xie family. Shrill laughter pierced my ears. I casually lifted my gaze and saw a slender figure hurrying toward us. His moon-white scholar's robe was worn thin from washing, its cuffs patched, yet on him it carried an air of refined elegance worthy of a bamboo grove recluse. He walked swiftly with his head lowered, only to stumble over an outstretched foot at the stone steps. Is young Master Xie so unsteady even on his feet? The richly dressed youths burst into laughter. I narrowed my eyes. That was the second legitimate son of the Vice Minister of War, notorious for currying favor with the powerful and bullying the weak. The green-robed youth encircled by them was none other than Xie Zheng, the legitimate eldest son of the Xie family's main branch. Rumors said Lady Xie had passed away early, leaving the stepmother to control the household finances while bearing a legitimate second son, with no backing behind him. He was secretly mocked by Chang'an's elite as the Xie family's discarded heir. Swish thud, Xie Zheng was shoved against a corridor pillar, blood seeping from his temple, yet he merely stood motionless, his phoenix eyes frozen with ice, as if long accustomed to such humiliation. I moved, slap. The purple-haired brush snapped in half within my palm, ink splattering across those mocking robes. Miss Jiang, Miss Jiang. The richly dressed young men's expressions changed abruptly. Their laughter cutting off mid-breath. I picked up the inkstone from the ground, weighing it thoughtfully in my palm. A fine she inkstone, using it to hit someone would truly be wasting precious goods. Who laid hands on him? I chuckled. No one dared to answer. So you all had a part in this. The moment the inkstone came down, blood splattered across my pomegranate red skirt. The Imperial Academy was in chaos, and as I turned around, my eyes met Xie Zheng's. His gaze was icy cold, silent, with wounds still visible at the corners of his lips. But 14-year-old me was immersed in that age of reckless fearlessness, spending every day dreaming of recklessly adorning blossoms beneath the clear sky. I cared not whether he was ice or cold, nor whether he rejected me. All I knew was that he was beautiful. Even his furrowed brow carried more refined elegance than all those noble scholars' paintings I'd copied, perfectly matching my heart's desire. Xie Zheng, my heart delights in you. I pulled out a silk handkerchief and pressed it firmly to his temple. Remember this. As long as Jiang Tongning breathes in Chang'an City, no one shall ever dare bully you again. Crabapple blossoms came fluttering down between us. He neither took my handkerchief nor refused it. Only later did I realize that wasn't silent consent, but rather he couldn't be bothered to argue with a spoiled noble girl. Day after day I'd ambush him outside the Xie residence. Forcing imperial-grade healing salves into his hands, I threatened those aristocratic youths. Whoever dared put dead mice in Xie Zheng's bookcase again would answer to me. I even begged my crown prince brother to specifically name Xie Zheng as my companion at the 100 Flowers banquet, forcing him to bow his head in submission to me. Back then, he remained consistently cold and distant, yet I foolishly misinterpreted his silence as unspoken affection and his retreat as coy reluctance. The turning point came in the deep winter of that year. The Xie family ancestral hall was damp and chilly. Even the candle flames seemed frozen in place. When I lifted my skirts and rushed inside, I saw Xie Zheng kneeling on the blue brick floor. As the Xie family head's whip came down, I threw myself forward without a second thought. In an instant, my back burned with searing pain as if flesh had been torn open. Jiang Tongning. It was the first time he had called me by my full name. He suddenly grabbed my wrist with such force it felt like he might crush the bones. I caught the faint scent of blood from his sleeve, mingled with the musty odor of temple incense ashes. Uncle Xie. I turned despite the pain, shielding Xie Zheng within the shadows. On the day of the ancestral hall fire, Brother Aijing had been collating the Book of Rites with the Imperial Academy scholar in the library since dawn and didn't return until dusk. I produced the jade token from my sleeve. This is the entry pass the scholar gave him that day. The Xie family head's whip hung suspended mid-air. Uncle, you're judging Brother Aijing guilty based solely on one person's account. That's utterly unfair to him. My peripheral vision caught sight of Xie Zheng's younger brother hiding behind a pillar as I stared directly into Patriarch Xie's eyes. Uncle could also inquire with His Highness the Crown Prince. That very day at the hour of the monkey, His Highness summoned us to discuss the spring and autumn annals. The air grew terrifyingly still. Xie Zheng's breath against the back of my neck felt like that of a wounded beast. Only when Patriarch Xie snorted coldly and whipped his horse to leave did I realize my silk robe was already soaked through with cold sweat. Meddlesome. Xie Zheng's voice remained icy, yet when I turned back, I saw him staring fixedly at my back where wounds and blood marked my skin. Moonlight seeped through the window lattice, casting a reddish glow at the corners of his eyes. Why? His voice was hoarse. I parted my lips, the words "because I like you" pressing against my tongue, yet I swallowed them back in the end, turning my face away. I muttered stubbornly, just couldn't stand it. His Adam's apple bobbed. The night wind swept through the hall, carrying unspoken words that dissolved into silence. It was only much later that I learned that was the first time in 10 years since his mother's death that someone had defended him before his father. He began silently permitting my closeness, allowing me to grasp his sleeve, encircle his waist, even press kisses upon his cheek. Though he didn't respond, neither did he push me away or show disgust. I felt as though I'd finally won him, until I noticed the new calluses between his knuckles, the unhealed bruises at his waist. The Xie family had always been distinguished scholars, passing down literary traditions through generations. Yet now his writing hand had begun keeping company with swords day and night. Xie Aijing, the third medicine bottle shattered at my feet, porcelain shards skittering to his boots. He was winding blood-soaked bandages around his hand, tightening the crimson-stained cloth with 3 more ruthless turns when I called his name. As if this flesh-and-blood body didn't belong to him. What do you really want? I sobbed, clutching at his sleeve. In 1 more year I'd reach hairpinning age, and here I was scheming every possible way to make him propose to the Grand Tutor's household sooner. After all, he is still a member of the Xie family. Even if he isn't highly regarded, with an official title to his name, my parents would surely agree to this marriage. Isn't pursuing an official career through imperial examinations good enough? My father still holds some influence at court. Why must you insist on Jiang Tongning? He suddenly raised his eyes, his gaze colder than ever before. You're always like this, only seeing what you want to see. At that moment, I was merely ashamed and angry, not yet realizing I had never truly occupied a place in his heart. Nor did I know that what I perceived as closeness was merely an inch of cage he begrudgingly allotted me while drawing boundaries around himself. The bronze mirror reflected my haggard face. Faint shadows had already appeared beneath my eyes after just a few days. I flung the jade comb heavily onto the dressing table, producing a crisp clatter. Must I be the first to lower my head again? I gave a bitter smile at my reflection in the mirror. Yet at last month's polo match, when the startled horse reared up, it was his arms that pulled me tightly against his chest. I remember how his heartbeat against me sounded far more frantic than the panicked steed. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, yet he hadn't even sent a single message. Crack! The sound of a medicine bowl shattering suddenly came from the outer room, interrupting my thoughts. I lifted the beaded curtain to see Uncle Jiang kneeling frantically on the floor, gathering the broken pieces. Young miss. Seeing me emerge, Uncle Jiang's movements grew visibly more flustered. my gaze fixed on that brownish puddle on the floor. My heart suddenly clenched. Whose medicine is this? Uncle Jiang didn't answer, beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Mother's. Uncle Jiang still didn't respond, but the creases between his brows had already given the answer. Only then did I realize with shock that during these days I'd been immersed in romantic affairs. I hadn't even known my mother was ill. I lifted my skirt and ran toward Mother's courtyard. In late spring, the blue stone path was strewn with crabapple petals, slippery underfoot. Turning the corridor corner, I collided with Chundao carrying a bronze basin, its water splashing all over me. Young mistress. Chundao knelt in panic, the basin clattering to the ground. The madam forbade us to tell you. My heart plummeted as I rushed into the inner chamber, heedless of my soaked skirt. A thick medicinal odor assaulted me, tightening my throat. Mother reclined on the couch, her face frighteningly pale, yet still clutching an account book in her hand. Mother, my voice caught in my throat, crumbling into a broken sob. My mother looked up and saw me, instinctively trying to hide the account book behind her back when she was suddenly seized by violent coughing. I rushed forward to steady her, only then noticing the faint crimson stains on her sleeves. It's just an old illness flaring up. She forced herself upright. But when she saw my reddened eyes, she could no longer maintain the pretense. The twilight outside the window deepened, and the flickering candlelight cast deeper shadows on Mother's face as the wind blew. Suddenly, I recalled those words from that day. Jiang Tongning, you always see only what you want to see. In an instant, I was overwhelmed with guilt. On the night I insisted on staying to tend to her illness, I realized Father hadn't returned home for 3 days. In the dead of night, Mother clutched the quilt tightly. The third prince is targeting the Eastern Palace this time. Those so-called disciples and old associates mentioned in the memorial, which of them weren't originally recommended to your father by the Crown Prince? Her words were cut short by another bout of heart-wrenching coughs, flecks of dark red staining her handkerchief anew. I stared at the nearly burnt-out incense in the gilded censer, recalling how the third prince had praised Father before the emperor at last year's palace banquet, disciples and old associates throughout the court, and how the crown prince's smile had frozen instantly. Thankfully your father has always been cautious. Mother suddenly grasped my ice-cold hand with surprising strength, her palm slick with cold sweat. After all, His Majesty trusts him. I couldn't tell whether these words were meant to comfort me or convince herself. On the day of the Imperial Academy's grand examination, I hadn't intended to go, but Mother took my hand and pleaded, Ninga, times are different now, you mustn't be willful. Her fingertips were icy cold, yet unusually resolute. You were the one who insisted on attending the Imperial Academy. Now for this examination, though His Majesty may not attend personally, someone from the palace will surely be present. You absolutely mustn't give anyone cause for gossip at such a time. I went, yet this very departure utterly crushed me. The Grand Princess's Phoenix carriage halted before the main gate of the Imperial Academy. Xiejing took the lead, claiming first place in the martial examination, drawing cheers from the entire crowd. Standing on the viewing platform, I watched as the Grand Princess sized him up with that mother-in-law appraising her son-in-law gaze, my heart aching and breath stifled. While everyone was distracted, I quietly slipped around to the back hall, only to see the usually respectful scholar deep in conversation with the princess. Lord Xie excels in both literary and martial arts. He's bound for greatness. Your Highness has excellent taste. Minghui took a liking to him. What could I possibly do? For someone as noble as Lady Minghui to favor Lord Xie, it's truly his good fortune. I've noticed that girl from the Jiang family seems quite taken with Lord Xie. Your Highness should guard against her sooner rather than later. Upon hearing this, the Grand Princess's expression turned icy. The Jiang family, what status does she hold to dare compete with Minghui for a man? Soon enough. Whether the Jiang family remains in Chang'an City may become uncertain. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard rumors earlier that Princess Minghue's horse had spooked a few days ago, and it was Xie Zheng who tamed the steed in the street to save her. The Grand Princess had people investigating his background everywhere. I'd thought it was merely to express gratitude, but never imagined Xie Zheng had actually caught the princess's fancy. Where is Xie Zheng? He's always been cold toward me, yet he publicly rode horseback to rescue the princess. No wonder he hasn't paid me any attention these past few days. The more I think about it, the more humiliated and angry I feel. I can't bear to stay here another moment. I hurried out, only to collide with a solid chest at the corner. The familiar scent of agarwood enveloped me. It was Xie Zheng. Where are you running off to? He steadied my swaying body, frowning slightly. Always so reckless. I looked up at him. The sunlight streaming from behind cast a golden halo around his silhouette, obscuring the emotions in his eyes. But his tone made it sound as though my days of self-pity had nothing to do with him. Did you learn martial arts just for today? My throat suddenly tightened, my voice trembling. Xie Zheng's expression froze. Who told you something? The Grand Princess just praised you publicly, saying you possess the noble bearing of dragons and phoenixes. I abruptly wrenched my hand free, the sting of nails digging into my palm barely steadying my trembling voice. She's taken a fancy to you, yet you still. Jiang Tongning, he cut me off, brows knotted tightly. Nonsense. Nothing of the sort. Talking nonsense. I let out a laugh, more bitter than any sob. The fury boiling within me finally breached its dam. I yanked the sword from his waist and hurled it to the ground. The obsidian scabbard struck the bluestone with an ear-splitting metallic clang. The string of black jade beads on the sword tassel scattered instantly, the very ones I had stubbornly insisted on threading myself for his birthday last year. Xie Zheng stared at the mess on the floor, his jaw clenched tight, yet he never uttered a single word of explanation. But this silence cut deeper than any blade. Suddenly it struck me, my shameless pursuit these past 2 years, all those brazen attempts to get closer, those sleepless nights pining for him, perhaps in his eyes, they were nothing but a joke. He never truly cared about me at all. This wasn't the first time he ignored me. But right now, I could truly feel the agony of having my sincerity trampled upon. Outside, the once clear and sunny sky suddenly roared with thunder, and rain poured down in an instant. Fine, I tilted my head back, desperately trying to hold back the tears, but they still burst forth like a breached dam. Xie Zheng, since it's come to this, from this day forward, all ties between us are severed. I stared fixedly at him. The rain blurred my vision, yet I could still make out the tight line of his pressed lips. If I, Jiang Tongning, ever bother you again, may I be struck by lightning. The last words were practically screamed, mingling with the rolling thunder, sounding especially shrill amidst the curtain of rain. With that, I turned and ran, my embroidered shoes splashing muddy water from the puddles, just like my heart that had been trampled beyond recognition. I didn't look back at Xie Zheng's turbulent gaze, nor at his trembling hands as he picked up his sword, much less hear those words drowned out by the storm. 3 days later, military reports from the northern frontier arrived in the capital, Xie Zheng's name prominently listed among them. All of Chang'an buzzed with rumors. This was an opportunity for him to achieve merit and glory, secured by the Grand Princess herself. Upon his triumphant return to Chang'an, he would marry Princess Minghui. 7 more days passed, and an imperial decree spread throughout Chang'an announcing the crown prince's deposition and confinement in the night court. On the same day, the Jiang family received an imperial edict sentencing them to exile in Dianan. 5 years have passed since we parted. Now we meet again at last. The steward of the princess's estate finally ceased making things difficult for me. Slowly I knelt upon the stone steps, pressing my forehead against the bluestone scorched by the blazing sun. This humble servant thanks your excellency for your grace. The voice was as calm as stagnant water. As I rose, I deliberately turned my body sideways, passing close enough to Xie Zheng to catch the scent of sinking incense on his collar, that fragrance I had once loved most. From behind came an almost imperceptible gasp. In Yu Guangli's peripheral vision, Xie Zheng's hands were clasped behind his back, his knuckles turning pale with tension. Those eyes of his, usually as calm as ancient wells, now seemed to churn with turbulent waves. He had probably never imagined that the once arrogant noble daughter of the Grand Tutor from Chang'an would now be reduced to kneeling humbly at his fiancé's mansion gates, lowly as an ant. But what did any of this matter? I walked the roads of southern Yunnan, those 2,000 li where every step left a bloody imprint that was true suffering. The shackles wore through flesh, scabs formed and split, until finally they fused with the rusted iron. In moments of desperate hunger, I crawled on the ground fighting stray dogs for scraps from spoiled water barrels. My throat burned from the acidic swill, yet my fingers still clung desperately to the barrel's edge. So this is how low a human can sink to stay alive. Uglier than any beast. But true despair came only after reaching southern Yunnan. It was the kind of desperate situation that made me wish for death countless times in my life. We were herded into mist-shrouded mountains. The pale green fog never lifted, carrying the stench of rotting wood and decaying swamps, coiling around exposed skin like serpents. Every breath felt like swallowing mold-stained silk, the throat clogged with an unshakable metallic sweetness. Deep in the dense forest, ancient trees blotted out the sky. Vines hung like nooses, and centipedes and scorpions lurked beneath the rotting leaves. One misstep, and leeches would spring from the mud, burrowing into pant legs to suck blood, leaving trails of crimson when ripped away. As night fell, swarms of mosquitoes gathered like black clouds, their incessant buzzing making one's scalp crawl. Ravenous for blood, they targeted festering flesh, their tiny gnawing sounds rustling like the whispers of vengeful spirits. At the break of dawn, I often found those who would never wake again, curled up on straw mats, their faces purplish black, dark blood congealed around their 7 orifices, as if they had merely sunk into another deeper nightmare. The day my parents left, the rain poured relentlessly, the downpour washed over their bloated faces, the maggots writhing at father's mouth swept by the torrent into mother's half-open eye socket. I knelt in the mud, watching as the bailiff's iron hooks pierced their waists and bellies, dragging their corpses along the gravel road, stripping away strips of flesh that mingled with blood, winding like crimson streams. Raindrops pelted my face, mixing with bloody tears that trickled into the corners of my mouth, bitter as bile. In that moment, I realized that the depths of grief could be so bone-chilling and heart-scorching, utterly paralyzing. I lived through those days, helpless, engulfed in agony. Ahead lay endless servitude, while behind loomed the abyss of miasma-filled forests in southern Yunnan. As dusk enveloped everything, I followed the painters through the side gate of the princess's residence. The evening breeze of Chang'an carried the sweet fragrance of locust blossoms, refreshing and delightful, finally free from the scent of decaying leaves and miasma that permeated southern Yunnan. Jiang Tongning, a soft call came from beneath the shade of the ginkgo tree. Xie Zheng emerged from the shadows. He still wore the same brocade robe from this afternoon, as if he had never left. Marquis Xie. I lowered my gaze and bowed deeply, pressing my body as low as possible whenever I was with him. He always called me by my full name like this. In the past, I loved hearing my name roll off his tongue. Only now do I realize how impatience laced that voice every single time. He suddenly stepped forward. He unexpectedly grabbed my wrist. Your hand. His Adam's apple bobbed as his voice cracked slightly, his fingertips brushing over the rough calluses on my palm. These were marks left by Yunnan's scorching sun, prison shackles, and countless years of hard labor. I frowned and broke free as if scalded. This lowly servant is coarse and fears sullying the Marquis. Yet he paid no heed to my words. I'll escort you. His voice was hoarse, as if forced through clenched teeth. I gazed at the distant lights of West Street, where a drafty firewood shed awaited me. My lord, you humble this servant too much. I took another half-step back and bowed respectfully once more, pointing into the distance with my fingertips. This servant. Before I could finish speaking, Xie Jing suddenly yanked me into a dark alleyway beyond the lantern's glow. Jiang Tongning, the veins on his arm, braced beside my ear, stood out taut. Must you speak to me in this manner? Am I not being considerate enough to suit your lordship's fancy? I smiled faintly, tilting my head to meet his stormy gaze. Our bonds were severed long ago, my voice soft as a sigh. If word of this entanglement reaches Lady Minghue's ears, your lordship may not fear the consequences, but this humble maid still wishes to keep her life. His breath hitched, as if my words had struck a nerve. Fine, very well. He abruptly released me, staggering back a step, the pain in his eyes nearly overflowing. Jiang Tongning, you truly, always manage to be this heartless. I smoothed out the sleeve he had crumpled in his grip and bowed once more. This servant takes her leave. Yes, I could be ruthless. That young mistress of the Jiang family who once flushed with delight at his utterance of Jiang Tongning, she had long perished in that torrential downpour, died on the exiled road to Yunnan. If not ruthless, how could I protect this battered body riddled with scars? The soft chime of jade ornaments behind me told me he still stood rooted to the spot. Moonlight stretched my shadow long and thin, like an abyss now lying between our present stations, or perhaps like a merciless blade, severing all lingering attachments, all foolish fantasies, all traces of the past. The next morning, as dawn's light first filtered through the lattice windows of West Street scriptorium, I was using a worn brush dipped in cheap ochre to touch up a painting. Suddenly there came a commotion outside the door, followed by the flustered footsteps of shopkeeper Wang. Painter Jiang, there's nobility wanting to buy your copy of Han Shizai's Night Revels. My brush paused. Vermilion dripping onto Han Shizai's sleeve, blooming into a glaring crimson stain. I looked up to see Xie Jing standing at the doorway. Behind him, two attendants carried a heavy sandalwood chest, its lid slightly ajar to reveal gleaming silver ingots within. If the Marquis desires paintings, he could simply send someone to fetch them. I lowered my eyes and continued outlining the screen. No need to personally visit such a squalid place. He strode straight to my desk, his black official boots crushing the scattered sketches beneath them. I insist on seeing your drawings. Xie Zheng's fingers traced the paper held by the courtesan in the painting. Didn't you always force me to look at these sketches of yours? My brush tip trembled, ruining half the drapery folds. The former Grand Preceptor's daughter was known for her wild and unruly ways, her only redeeming quality being her mastery of meticulous brushwork. I most enjoy copying those handsome men from ancient portraits. I've nearly reproduced all the figures of the 7 sages of the bamboo grove from the noble scholar's scroll, and I particularly relish forcing Xie Jing to watch me paint, compelled to sit across from me. I insisted he observe how I meticulously outlined that majestic stance like a solitary pine standing tall. Xie Jing, don't you think these eyebrows and eyes resemble yours? I deliberately made the corners of the painted figure's eyes bear a faint likeness to his. But Ji Kang was far more interesting than you. At least he could play the zither. The youth maintained a cold expression, yet when I stole glances at him, he quietly shifted half an inch closer to the painting desk. I secretly rejoiced. This must be jealousy on his part. But time waits for no one. Snapping back to reality, I was about to change the paper when he pressed down on my wrist. Keep this one. I'll pay 300 taels. A sharp intake of breath came from shopkeeper Wang at the doorway. 500 taels. He repeated it, his knuckles rapping against the painted folds of Han Shizai's robe. Or, Xie Zheng's voice suddenly dropped as he leaned close to my ear. Tell me your real purpose for sneaking into the princess's residence. My breath caught. Yesterday at the princess's residence, I had indeed taken advantage of gathering painting tools to secretly flip through the Grand Princess's confidential letters, but there had clearly been no one around at the time. I just wanted to earn a few extra coins. I feigned composure, yet the tip of my brush trembled uncontrollably. If the Marquis finds it too expensive, you've made a mistake here. Suddenly, he grasped my hand holding the brush and guided me to add a hidden pattern behind the banquet screen painting. My entire body froze. This was my old trick from back then, always hiding the 3 characters Sierraging transformed into Oracle Bone script within my paintings, then forcing him to discover these secret confessions. I averted my gaze, not daring to look at him, my peripheral vision fixed on the silver chest by the door. 300 taels would be enough to grease the wheels and meet with the deposed Crown Prince's former followers. 500 could even bribe the jailers at the Court of Judicial Review. The warmth radiating from his fingertips burned so fiercely it unsettled my heart. My composure was on the verge of crumbling completely. Done. I abruptly withdrew my hand, my nails leaving 3 red marks across his palm. As your lordship can see, this painting still requires a few more days to complete. Your lordship may send someone to collect it 3 days hence. I was eager to see my guest off, yet couldn't ignore Sierraging's suddenly constricted pupils. The Adam's apple beneath his official collar rolled violently. For a fleeting moment, I thought he'd reverted to that youth whose ears would blush crimson at my teasing, but in the blink of an eye, he donned the icy mask of Marquis Dongping again. Though thankfully he finally departed, when shopkeeper Wang entered holding the banknotes, I was staring absent-mindedly at the twin lotus flowers in the painting. The little flower Sierraging personally added happened to conceal the exact spot where the Sin character was branded on my wrist. Painter Jiang, shopkeeper Wang called out to me in confusion. I wiped my face, only to find my palm drenched in sweat. Outside the window, the carriage slowly departed, its wheels rolling over the bluestone pavement. A gust of wind lifted the carriage curtain, revealing half of a dark jade sword tassel. That was the very strand I had shattered years ago. I never imagined he would gather every single piece and string them back together. The 3-day deadline had not yet arrived, but the people from the Grand Princess's residence had already reached this dilapidated literary hall on West Street, whereas Painter Jiang, the steward's shrill voice pierced the quiet of the scriptorium as his paperweight slammed onto my still-wet painting with a sharp smack. The princess commands that the eyebrows and eyes in the princess admiring flowers from the day before yesterday be redrawn, with his chin slightly raised, the folds at the corners of his eyes conveying 3 parts arrogance and 7 parts disdain. He glanced at me sideways and said, "Painter Jiang, you shall accompany this old servant to the manor at once." I stared at the indigo pigment staining my sleeve that day. The eldest princess had praised the painting effusively and even rewarded me with an extra 10 taels of silver. In the waterside pavilion, Lady Minghui idly toyed with the grapes in her crystal bowl. Seeing me kneeling on the green jade tiles, she suddenly burst into laughter and turned to ask the matron beside her, "So this is the painter brother Arjing vouched for that day." Before I could kowtow, she suddenly slammed the table. "Guards, press her hands down." 4 sturdy maids immediately seized my hands and pinned them fiercely onto the rosewood table. With a sharp clink, a golden hairpin grazed my fingertips and embedded itself deep into the wooden surface. "I am dull-witted and know not how I have offended your highness." My voice trembled, yet I dared not withdraw my hand. "You don't know." She suddenly grabbed my left hand and roughly pulled back my sleeve. The brand of guilt gleamed a sinister bluish-purple in the twilight. "A lowly criminal slave like you dares to have my Asian brother personally visit your filthy scriptorium." My ears buzzed. So this was Sierraging's romantic entanglement. What does his visit to the literary hall have to do with me? This spoiled princess actually vents her inexplicable anger on me. "Your highness is wise." I lowered my body, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "The Marquis merely went to the literary hall to purchase paintings. Of course this princess is wise. She suddenly grabbed the scalding teacup and flipped her wrist. The boiling tea splashed onto the back of my hand, instantly searing a patch of crimson. I clenched my teeth hard, swallowing the cry of pain back into my belly. For instance, right now I know Brother Arjun is rushing here. Sure enough, hurried hoofbeats sounded in the distance, growing rapidly nearer. The princess's eyes lit up, her golden hairpin swaying lazily before my eyes. Guess what? Will Brother Arjun come to protect these painting hands of yours? The hairpin's tip suddenly pressed against my throat. Or this bewitching face of yours? The cold glint of the golden hairpin made my eyelids tremble, while a faint sting spread across my throat. A drop of blood slid down my neck. Junju. Xiezheng's voice came from beyond the waterside pavilion, laced with suppressed fury. Junju Minghui seemed not to hear. Flicking her wrist to add another crimson line along my neck, Xiezheng stepped forward swiftly, gripping her wrist, holding the hairpin with such force his knuckles turned white. What is your highness doing? Brother Arjun arrives just in time. The princess rose gracefully with an unconcerned tinkling laugh, pointing the golden hairpin at me. This lowly maid, this official comes seeking the imperial East Pearl. Xiezheng interrupted coldly, unfurling a yellow silk edict from his sleeve. 3 days ago, when delivering gifts to Her Highness by decree, it was lost here. I caught sight of the princess's pearl hairpin trembling with each step. Such audacious deceit sent a chill down my spine. Xiezheng's gaze suddenly swept over the bloodstain on my neck, his eyes darkening abruptly. If your highness favors pearls, this humble servant could present your highness with several pecks. Your highness mustn't jest with human lives. Xiezheng abruptly released Princess Minghui and stepped in front of me. The princess was about to explode in anger when suddenly the chime of the Grand Princess's carriage sounded in the distance. Seizing the opportunity, Xiezheng pushed me backward, his thin lips barely moving as he whispered, "West Corner Gate, run." I turned and sprinted away, only to collide with a warm embrace at the corner. Looking up, I met General Chen's smiling eyes. This former disciple of my father's was now also the most capable hidden piece among the Crown Prince's old faction. You've suffered, child. He swiftly slipped me a wax-sealed secret letter and whispered, 3 days hence at the hour of the goat, celestial chamber of drunken immortal pavilion. From behind came the furious rebuke of the Grand Princess. Xiezheng, how dare you? In my final glance back, Xiezheng stood sword in hand against the twilight. The black jade beads on his sword tassel swayed gently in the wind, their chime gradually merging with the remembered sound of the Imperial Academy's corner bells. Leaving the drunken immortal tower, it was already past midnight. The latch of the study was broken clean in two. I froze outside the threshold, staring at the pool of still wet blood on the ground. It belonged to Manager Wang. Whoosh! The instant arrows whistled through the air. I instinctively threw myself toward the painting desk. A crisp tearing sound of rice paper came from behind as a jagged gash suddenly split open the blank space of the 8,000 li of rivers and mountains painting, the white fletching of the arrow still quivering. Didn't expect any fish to slip through the net. A dark figure leaped down from the beam, curved blade glinting in the moonlight. Not a single remnant of the Crown Prince's faction shall remain. The newcomer belonged to the Third Prince's faction. This Third Prince was precisely the mastermind behind the infamous Crown Prince deposition case from years past. Yet strangely, all these years, even with the Grand Princess backing him after the Crown Prince was deposed, His Majesty never formally bestowed upon him the rightful title of heir apparent. I grabbed the inkstone and hurled it at the candle flame. In the darkness, I heard the chilling scrape of blades against the folding screen. The rear window was within reach. But another shadowy figure blocked my escape. As the curved blade came slashing toward my face, I suddenly remembered that rainy night in southern Yunnan when Xie was drained dry by leeches. Turns out the stench of death carries the same metallic tang of rusted blood. Clang! Sparks from the clashing of dark iron blades sprayed onto my face. The familiar scent of sinking incense mixed with the metallic tang of blood rushed toward me. Xie Zheng's sword tip deflected the scimitar as he shielded me behind him. Dongping Marquis, the assassin sneered. Xie Zheng's answer was a sword thrust to the chest. As blood sprayed onto the wall, he swiftly dispatched another with a backhand strike, a lethal move honed on the northern battlefields. Can you still walk? He turned to steady me, his palm tightening abruptly when it brushed the arrow wound on my shoulder. You've been shot. Only then did I notice the searing pain in my left shoulder. That arrow just now still grazed me after all. It's nothing serious. Before the words had fully left my mouth, he suddenly swept me up into his arms. As his dark outer robe enveloped me, I caught the bitter medicinal scent of wound powder lingering on his lapels. This man had grown so accustomed to injuries they'd become second nature. Xie Zheng, I struggled to get down, but he pressed me firmly against his chest. Don't move. His voice was hoarse with emotion. You've been targeted for so long, yet you still. The carriage raced through the streets of Chang'an City. I leaned against his chest, counting the beats of his heart. 1, 2, faster even than when I'd fallen into his arms during that polo match at the Imperial Academy years ago. I woke in the bedchamber of Dongping Marquis Manor. The room was warm and delicately scented, uncannily reminiscent of my former boudoir. Xie Zheng was personally preparing medicine. The candlelight casting deep shadows across his brow. I gazed at his tense jawline and, as if possessed, reached out to touch it. Unexpectedly, he turned, and my palm landed on his back, ridged with countless scars that instantly made my fingertips ache from the roughness. Bear with it. His medicine-dipped hand hovered above my shoulder, revealing fragmented old wounds in the candlelight. This will hurt. The ointment's coolness sent a shiver through my entire body. He leaned down, blowing gently on the wound, just like that year when I'd angrily smashed medicine bottles after learning he abandoned literature for martial arts, and he'd carefully cradled my fingers to blow on them. Suddenly, my mind wandered. Perhaps at that time, Xie Zheng had once harbored a shred of sincerity, but now, he was already the Marquis of Dongping. His military merits piled high, a noble title personally bestowed by the emperor. Even the Xie clan, who had once bullied and humiliated him, now had to grovel at his feet, and I was but an ant branded with sin. Amidst the swirling medicinal fragrance, Xie Zheng's fingertip pressed against the fresh wound on my shoulder. Didn't you say we weren't acquainted? I suddenly spoke, my voice bitterer than the medicinal brew. Why bother wading into these troubled waters? His medicine-applying hand froze abruptly, scattering golden powder across the brocade quilt, staining it with dark patches. Jiang Tongning. He called me by my full name, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. Do you really think? The words reached his lips only to be swallowed back as he turned to fetch clean gauze, leaving me only with his rigid back, summer garments being thin. I caught a glimpse beneath his black brocade robe where those ferocious scars stood shockingly clear. The longest one ran diagonally from his right shoulder down to his waist, as if cleaved open by a sharp blade. For some reason, a sharp, needle-like pain still pricked at my heart, as if countless silver needles were piercing me all at once. Turns out, while I was toiling away in the miasma-filled jungles of southern Yunnan, he too had narrowly escaped death amidst the flashing blades of the northern frontier. These wounds, I asked softly, were they all left by the northern frontier? His back stiffened slightly, but he never answered. My lord, a rapid knocking suddenly came from outside the door. Someone from the Grand Princess's residence has arrived, saying the young mistress has fallen suddenly ill. His Majesty. The tenderness in Xie Zheng's eyes instantly cooled. Prepare the horses. He spoke coldly toward the door, then turned to give me a deep look, hesitating as if wanting to say something but stopping himself. Xie Zheng departed without leaving a trace. Who knows what grave illness had befallen that noble Minghui County princess, one so severe it could detain him for 10 full days without return. I stood in the courtyard of Dongping Marquis's residence, gazing at the bronze bells hanging from the eaves, their chimes ringing faintly. How utterly ridiculous. My heart nearly softened that day. Young mistress, the princess has arrived and summons you to the flower hall. The maid who had been tending to me these past few days hurried over, her eyes veiled with pity. My fingers paused briefly before curling into a cold smile. Indeed, in this city of Chang'an, what wall doesn't leak wind? Since she came in person, she must have uncovered my background, that daughter of the Grand Tutor who once shamelessly pursued Xie Zheng, now reduced to criminal status yet still hauntingly appearing at his residence. I straightened my brand new lotus root-colored ruchuan and walked toward the flower hall. Inside the flower hall, Princess Minghui reclined on a daybed, her delicate fingers holding golden canary food as she absent-mindedly teased the bird in its cage. Seeing me enter, she arched the corner of her eye and curled her crimson lips slightly. Last time I actually didn't recognize you. Isn't this the renowned Miss Jiang? She deliberately emphasized the words Miss Jiang, her eyes filled with mockery. I lowered my gaze and curtsied. This humble maid greets the princess. No need. She chuckled lightly, casually scattering a handful of birdseed into the cage. This princess merely came today to see which shameless wench still dares cling to my brother Arjun. Her gaze swept over me, lingering on my new Ruchuan dress before she suddenly covered her lips with a laugh. So it's still you? I remained silent. She suddenly rose and slowly walked toward me, lifting my chin with her fingertip. Jiang Tongning, do you know what punishment awaits a criminal who flees privately? I raised my eyes to meet hers. This humble servant does not understand what your highness means. Playing dumb again, she sneered, abruptly turning my face away. You're quite skilled at feigning ignorance. Do you think hiding in Brother Arjun's residence will save you? She turned and paced, her skirt trailing behind her. This princess is in a generous mood today. I'll give you 2 choices. First, get out of Chang'an immediately and never set foot here again. Second, she suddenly turned around, a flash of venom gleaming in her eyes. This princess will personally escort you back to the Dali temple and let you taste what it means to wish for death. The flower hall fell deathly silent in an instant. Even the caged songbirds dared not utter a sound. I slowly raised my gaze, meeting the surging flames of jealousy in her eyes. What does your highness mean by this? Her pupils contracted sharply. How dare you? I chuckled lightly. Your ladyship accuses this lowly one with every word. Threatens with every phrase. It almost seems like jealousy. Slap. A stinging slap landed hard across my face, burning with pain. You wretched creature. Her fingers trembled with rage. Do you think Brother Arjun would offend the princess's household for your sake? Dream on. What is your highness doing? Xie Zheng's voice suddenly rang out, sharp as shattering ice and jade. He hurried over from the carved doorway, his black official robes still carrying traces of windblown dust. His gaze fell upon my swollen cheek, eyes dark as tempered ice. Princess Minghui's hand still hung suspended mid-air, the bloodstains from her meticulously manicured nails burning fiercely where they'd raked across my face. Brother Arjun, her voice instantly softened, her fingertips painted with rouge gently tugging at Xie Zheng's sleeve. This wretched maid spoke insolently. Attendants. Xie Zheng directly withdrew his sleeve and called sharply, escort the princess back to her residence. The roomful of maids and matrons knelt in unison, their foreheads touching the floor. Princess Minghui's delicate face twisted instantly. Xie Zheng, you're driving me away for a criminal slave. I lowered my head and retreated half a step, only to have Xie Zheng seize my wrist firmly. The heat from his palm sent a shiver through my entire body. Jiang Tongning now belongs to my Dongping Marquis estate. Xie Zheng's thumb pressed against my wrist bone, each word piercing like a dagger. Showing no mercy, Your Highness barges into official residences and arbitrarily tortures my people. Shall I go before His Majesty tomorrow to impeach the princess for failing to educate her child properly and abusing power? Princess Minghui's face turned deathly pale. You, how dare you? Her red-rimmed eyes stared at our clasped hands before she suddenly lunged at us like a madwoman. Her father was a treasonous criminal. By keeping her. Aren't you afraid of dragging down your entire Dongping Marquis household? Xiejing turned sideways, shielding me completely behind him. I caught the faint scent of agarwood from his collar, mingled with the fragrance of morning dew. That is also a matter of my Dongping Marquis household. What concern is it of your Highness? Your Highness should worry more about the affairs of the Grand Princess's residence. Escort the guest out. The two words fell like a judge's gavel. Two towering guards immediately seized Princess Minghui and dragged her away, her hair ornaments scattered as she struggled wildly, finally screaming at me, "Jiang Tongning, just you wait, do you think he can protect you forever?" I held my breath. Xiejing's hand suddenly tightened around my wrist, squeezing until my bones ached. Furious beyond measure, he turned to the steward and said, "Deliver my command, from this day forth. No one from the Grand Princess's residence shall set foot within the Marquis's manor." After Princess Minghui was escorted away, the flower hall fell abruptly silent, with only the steady drip of the water clock marking time. I turned to leave, but Xiejing intercepted me abruptly, pulling me into his embrace. "Does it hurt?" His fingertips lightly brushed the wound on my face, his gaze terrifyingly dark. "Have you lost your mind, letting her hit you like that? You never used to." He cut himself off mid-sentence, his voice softening. That day His Majesty urgently summoned me, ordering me to rush to the Western Barracks overnight. I didn't know she would come. "Marquis, you shouldn't have done this." I tilted my head to avoid him, my voice hoarse. "Offending your fiancé for a criminal slave isn't worth it. Jiang Tongning, who told you she's my fiancé?" Xiejing suddenly raised his voice, his tone carrying a hint of gritted teeth. The whole of Chang'an City inch, dazed from weeping. I still remembered his hoarse whispers of "I'm sorry" repeated endlessly, each word grating like a blunt knife carving into my heart in the depth of night as the water clock neared its end. This man must not have closed his eyes all night. He stubbornly guarded those scars, as though doing so could erase all the suffering I had endured. "Your sword tassel." My voice was terribly hoarse. He set down the medicine bowl, fingertips brushing over the string of black jade beads. "Of the 12 you shattered back then, I've recovered 11. Xiejing suddenly pulled something from his robe. "This last one was found at a relay station in southern Yunnan." I held my breath. In his palm lay half of a broken bead, its crack still stained with dried blood, the very one I'd pawned to the station master for medicine during my exile. Southern Yunnan. My hands clenched the brocade quilt tightly. "You went looking for me." Birds chirped outside the window, Xiejing's eyelashes casting faint shadows in the morning light. Suddenly, he reached out and pulled me into his embrace, the scent of agarwood instantly filling my senses. Last winter, the moment the northern border war ceased, I rushed south through the night. His scorching breath warmed the side of my neck as he spoke in a husky voice. "The Chong tribe's mounted scouts chased me relentlessly. When their arrow pierced my shoulder blade, I was just 30 miles from your mining camp." I leaned against his chest, listening to his heartbeat while offering comfort. The skin beneath my palm burned feverishly, transporting me back to that once-in-a-century blizzard in southern Yunnan. Countless convict slaves froze to death last winter, while I survived curled deep in the mine shaft, chewing my last piece of flatbread to stay alive. By the time spring began this year, news of the Great Northern Victory spread through southern Yunnan like wildfire. At last, His Majesty's pardon pierced through the snowstorm. What happened next? Later, he chuckled softly, though it sounded more like a sigh. His Majesty urgently summoned me back to the capital. I ran a high fever for 7 days on the journey, unable to eat or sleep. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. He lowered his head, pressing his lips to the character sin on my wrist bone, word by word, as if carving it into flesh. with these military merits, I beg your majesty to grant a general pardon. The medicine bowl was suddenly overturned, its brown liquid spilling across the blue-gray bricks, in his embrace. I caught the lingering scent of golden saw medicine mingled with sinking incense on his inner robe. This scent, I've actually dreamed of it every peaceful night I've spent in southern Yunnan. I see, so that's it. Xie Zheng's palm brushed through my disheveled long hair as he murmured, "Thankfully, I've finally gotten you back." As his trailing words faded, I heard his heartbeat pounding like thunder. The third watch had passed, and the confidential archives of the Dali Temple were engulfed in towering flames. I stood atop the corner tower of Dongping Marquis Manor, gazing toward the distant imperial city, my fingers unconsciously rubbing against the secret letter concealed in my sleeve, given by General Chen. It contained irrefutable evidence detailing the third prince's collusion with the Qiong tribes of the northern border to assassinate the crown prince, everything arranged. Xie Zheng had appeared behind me without my noticing. I turned and pressed a token into his palm, the crown prince's private seal, usable by the right guard of the Imperial Forest Army. He suddenly gripped my wrist with painful force. "You went to see General Chen yourself." I saw shock and fury swirling in his eyes. "Xie," I smiled lightly, standing on tiptoe to kiss his tense jawline. "Do you think all I learned these 5 years in Yunnan was mining?" During those days and nights corroded by miasma, I made my living by drawing travel permits for Qiong merchant caravans, and in doing so, I thoroughly mapped out their military routes. General Chen lurked in the princess's residence for years, and the evidence he finally uncovered of the third prince's collusion with the enemy was entirely thanks to the Qiong cipher I'd recorded on those sheepskin scrolls. "Are you truly determined to go yourself?" Our original plan was for me to step forward, strike the grievance drum, and denounce the third prince under the pretense of clearing my father's name. He embraced me. "Leave everything that follows to me." Suddenly, the light dimmed. He stood at the border of light and shadow, his eyes darker than the night behind him, in the fifth watch of the night. The bells of palace upheaval resounded through the heavens. In the hall of golden chimes, His Majesty gazed at the evidence presented by Xie Zheng, then seized the teacup from the dragon-carved desk and shattered it against the third prince. "You vile creature, to harm your own elder brother, you dared collude with foreign tribes." The third prince struggled frantically, suddenly turning his aggression towards Xie Zheng. "Your Majesty, please see clearly. The Marquis of Dongping is slandering me." But before he could finish speaking, the tip of Xie Zheng's sword was already pressed against his throat. Just as everyone thought Xie Zheng was about to commit murder in court, he abruptly flipped his wrist and withdrew the sword's tip. He merely glanced at the third prince as if looking at a dead man. Then he removed his official cap himself, revealing a streak of frost-white hair at the young man's temple. "This subject is willing to stake his life that every word spoken is true," he declared, kneeling on one knee with the poise of a pine tree bending in the wind. "Each piece of this evidence of treason and collusion with the enemy is stained with the vengeful spirits of 30,000 northern frontier soldiers." The hall fell deathly silent, save for the crisp chime of ink-black jade beads swaying from his sword tassel. "I plead for justice for 30,000 fallen soldiers. May your Majesty see clearly." The final word fell like the clang of metal striking stone, leaving no room for doubt. That very afternoon, amidst the gaze of countless onlookers, the deposed crown prince's imperial carriage returned to the Eastern Palace. 3 days later, I personally visited the Eastern City prison. Before even stepping inside, I could hear the heart-wrenching sobs coming from within. Princess Minghui, her hair disheveled, clung to the iron bars, her gold-embroidered skirt trailing streaks of blood. "Uncle, mother," I reached up to adjust the coral hairpin at my temple, the very one that had been the eldest princess's most cherished ornament. The crimson coral beads glowed in the morning light, a sight that must have looked painfully familiar to her eyes. The crown prince adopted me as his foster sister in the name of his birth mother, Consort Chen, bestowing upon me the title of Princess Juri. Even that once resplendent mansion of the Grand Princess now became my official residence. "Princess, please restrain your grief," I spoke softly, fingertips brushing against the cold iron bars.
Her Highness the Grand Princess has already drunk poisoned wine in the censorate prison. She took her own life out of fear of punishment. How swift her departure was. Princess Minghui suddenly raised her head, her filthy face wide-eyed like a vengeful ghost. You vile creature, I'll kill you. Slap. A sharp slap struck her face. I shook my numb, tingling wrist and said with a smile, this slap is repayment for those witnesses in southern Yunnan whom the Grand Princess silenced. Then came another slap. This slap is for my parents. Don't you know, Princess, all this was done to steal your beloved for you. What exactly did my parents endure when your mother specifically sent people to escort them back then? My fingertips traced the trembling curve of her neck. They were locked in iron cages, treated like animals, for 7 days and nights. Not a drop of water, not a single grain of rice. A coppery taste suddenly flooded my throat. My hands clenched the iron bars until my knuckles turned white. Those unforgettable scenes surged through my mind. Father's chapped lips, mother's wrists bleeding from the iron shackles, and their final embrace forever frozen in that rainy southern night. Princess Minghui collapsed to the ground, her luxurious robes stained with filth. I straightened up, looking down at her shattered state with cold satisfaction. Though His Majesty harbored resentment toward the Grand Princess for instigating the imperial clan to force him to depose the Crown Prince years ago, he ultimately showed mercy to this niece out of familial bonds. But what could be done? She was but a disgraced princess bereft of her mother's protection. Her entire life would be spent within the confined walls of Dongcheng prison. As I turned to leave, her heart-wrenching wails and curses still echoed behind me. The morning breeze stirred, causing the coral hairpin to chime, a sound both melodious and mournful, like belated funeral music played 5 years too late for the departed soul. When I stepped out, Xie Zheng in his dark official robe was waiting beneath the eaves. The morning sunlight filtered through the lattice, casting dappled shadows on him, reminiscent of the crabapple blossom showers at the Imperial Academy years ago. Is it all over? He reached out to brush fallen petals from my shoulder. I moved forward and placed both hands in his. No, I stood on tiptoe to brush my lips against his. It's just beginning. In the distance, bells and drums resonated together as the new crown prince read the amnesty decree from the city tower. The summer breeze carried a hint of coolness as it swept past our intertwined hands. The half-piece of dark jade ring on his fourth finger glowed softly in the sunlight.